Virage, and it's a tremendously rare and obscure Aston Martin with V12 power. A decade ago, Aston Martin created the Virage and made it for just one model year in tremendously limited production with a starting price of over $210,000. Most people don't even know that this car exists. But here it is, the Virage. Today, I'm going to review it and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, big news! This Virage is currently for sale, and it's being auctioned live on Cars and Bids. The Virage is tremendously rare, just 1,000 units for the entire world, and it's beautiful and V12 powered, and this one's available on Cars and Bids. So, once you finish watching this video, click the link in the description below to visit the live auction for this Aston Martin Virage, where you can bid on it and buy it only on Cars and Bids. Alright, time for the quirks and features of the 2012 Aston Martin Virage, starting with the biggest quirk, which is the Virage itself. Now, I mentioned this is an obscure car, one model year only, just 1,000 units made for the whole world. Most people haven't even heard of it. And if that includes you, you might be wondering, what exactly is it? So, let me take you back to 2012, when Aston Martin's V12-powered two-door GT car lineup consisted of two models. There was the DB9, which started at $190,000 with 470 horsepower, and there was the DBS, which started around $270,000 with 510 horsepower. Aston Martin felt that there should be something in between them, bridging the gap between the DB9 and the DBS. And the result was the Virage, which started around $215,000 with 490 horsepower, right smack dab in the middle. Now, to you, that may seem like a little bit of a thin slice of the lineup, all three of those cars being sold together, particularly because they all looked basically the same. This is the DB9, this is the Virage, and this is the DBS. Tell them apart. I dare you. The other problem was they all had the same powertrain, the same 6-liter V12, just in different states of tune. They weren't that far apart. 470 horses in the DB9, 490 in this car, and 510 in the DBS. The same platform, the same chassis, the same look. It was all too the same. If that's what you're thinking, well, the market agreed, and Aston canceled the Virage after just one model year, 2012, and only 1,000 units sold for the whole world. Coupes, like this car, and convertibles, the Virage Volante, lasted just 1 year. But with all that said, even though the Virage was hard to distinguish when it was new compared to the DB9, on the used market, it's actually kind of appealing, especially against the DB9. For one thing, it's just rarer. The DB9 was made for many years, the Virage for only one. And even though they're basically the same car, that rarity adds a little cool factor. Plus, they sell for about the same money, but the Virage had some nice upgrades over the DB9. There was the 20 horsepower boost I've already mentioned, but other stuff too. The front end was slightly redesigned and modernized, a little bit more distinctive on the Virage. The Virage also got its own unique wheels that set it apart from the DB9, and frankly, I think they look great. The rocker panel down the side of the car was sculpted, Aston Martin said at the time, distinctively for the Virage. And here is a very geeky bit of early 2010s Aston trivia. This side aluminum trim piece over the grille and the fender has an LED light in it for the turn signal on the Virage, but not the DB9. Another upgrade to help this car justify its market position. Really, of course, all of this is minor stuff, but like I said, on the used market, the price difference between this and a DB9 isn't really that significant. And would you rather be some guy in a DB9 or a connoisseur in a Virage with a turn signal mounted in the aluminum trim? Something to think about. But anyway, next up, let's talk through the quirks and features of the Virage, beyond the mere existence of the Virage itself, starting with the key, which is really cool. It is this rectangle, and the top of it, or the bottom, is glass. This little glass brick mounted on the base of the key. And you can see the Aston Martin logo is inside that glass brick. It's a very cool design and very distinctive to this car. Now, you unlock the doors and they open up sort of upwards. Aston Martin calls it the swan wing door. It doesn't just open to the side, it gives a sense of occasion when you're getting in the car. But the coolest part about climbing in is what you do with the key. Take it and put it at the top of the center control stack. You see engine start and the Aston Martin logo. Well, push the key in here and then the car starts up and the glass base of the key with the Aston logo is staring right back at you. It is a tremendously cool idea, and it gives a real sense of occasion to the key and to starting up this car. Now, there's a lot to discuss in the interior of the Virage, but absolutely the quirkiest quirk is this. You can see at the base of the center console, there's a silver button here. Next to the traction control, the door locks. You push that, and something pops out. What is it? You pull on it, and it's a pen. An Aston Martin pen is mounted at the base of the center console. Next to your climate controls, your power locks button, there is a space for an Aston Martin pen. Absolutely bizarre. I've never seen anything like this in other cars before. A pen integrated into the center console next to the sport button. Now, as for the interior itself, there is both good and bad in here. The good news is there's a lot more good than bad. One good item is the overall design. It looks very simple, very beautiful, and I love the sort of waterfall shape of the center control stack coming down from the dashboard and turning into the center console. It's a gorgeous interior design, and everything looks great. And there are some other gorgeous bright spots. One is the leather. You have beautiful stitched leather everywhere on the dashboard, all over the center console, the center armrest, of course the seats, the steering wheel. It's all a lot of beautiful, nice to look at, nice to touch, nice to smell leather upholstery everywhere. And another bright spot in this interior is the gauge cluster. The gauges are absolutely gorgeous. The sort of silver aluminum look looks like a finely crafted modern watch face. It's a beautiful thing to look at when you're driving around, and you have the tachometer that goes in the reverse direction that you'd expect, which adds to sort of the exotic special feel of this car. But with that said, there are a few negatives in this interior like I mentioned. Probably the most obvious is some of the switchgear, the buttons and switches you press. Some of them feel cheap. The best example being the turn signal stalk, which you can see here. This is a vestige of the days when Aston Martin was owned by Ford. I believe this turn signal stalk comes off of a Ford, and it's cheap and plastic and really doesn't look good or feel good. It's kind of a disappointment. So are some other pieces of switchgear. But probably the biggest disappointment in this car, the navigation system, which is just a Garmin nav system integrated into an Aston Martin. This is the kind of thing you would have stuck with a window mount onto your windshield back in 2007 when you were driving across the country on an RV road trip with your grandma. And here it is integrated into an Aston Martin. Looks totally out of place and laughable for the price point, especially when this car was new. But beyond the pros and cons of this interior, there are also a lot of fantastic quirks and features in here. Starting with the speakers mounted on the dashboard. Bang & Olufsen sound system. You can see the speaker here. It's down. I say that because when you start the car, it rises up out of the dashboard electronically in order to provide you with a perfect listening experience. When you're done, you turn the car off, the speaker goes back down, automatically into the dashboard and retracts. Same deal with the Garmin navigation system screen. When the car is off, you can see it's just a square cutout panel on the top of the center control stack, but when you turn the car on, it automatically pops itself up so you can see your nav screen. Turn it off, and it goes right back down, back into place, which frankly is probably where you'd rather have it. Also in the center control stack, another interesting item in here is the gear selection in this car. You don't have a gear lever. Instead, you have push buttons for the transmission. You can see P, R, and D, obviously park, reverse, neutral, drive, and you press the one you want, and then a little light comes on the top to indicate that you're in that gear. Next up, here's another neat Aston Martin trick. Over on the driver's door panel, you can see the power mirror controls. Left, right, a little joystick to move things around. These mirror controls came directly out of Volvo models, which Ford also owned when this car was in development. And in fact, Volvo enthusiasts will recognize the L and R on the mirror controls are in Volvo's distinctive font, which doesn't match the font on any other parts of this interior because it was lifted straight out of Volvo. But here's the Easter egg. If you want to fold the mirrors in, press the L and R buttons at the same time and they fold. That's a trick on most modern Volvos and also some Aston Martins that used their equipment. Next up, here's another nice quirk. This one in the center console, you have this little leather pouch area in here. It's very tight. You can't get anything wide or large in here, but if you were given a business card, as you might be since you're an important Aston Martin owner, you can stick it in your little leather carrying pad and then have it handy should you need it later. Next up, here's another interesting quirk. The parking brake in this car is mounted not in the center console, but in the driver's footwell. You can see it's right here between the seat and the door. And the operation of this parking brake is unusual. To put it on, you pull it all the way up, now it's on, but then you can put it down, so it doesn't make it hard to get in and out of the car. When you want to take it back off again, you pull it all the way up, then push the button to release it, and push it down, and then the parking brake is off. This is called a flyaway parking brake. It was used on some Italian cars in like the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, but not common in the modern era, but this car has it. Also in this vicinity, another item I really like here, the interior door panel, you can see there's a little leather strap here. I guess this would be for a phone. It's kind of a nice placement. It's sort of near you, sort of facing you, and it just keeps it there. It's a good idea to have a little phone holder in that position. And here's another fantastic quirk. When you go to start up the car, you insert the glass key into the center. In the gauge cluster, a little pixelated display pops on and says, Pure Aston Martin. And it shows the Aston Martin logo every time you start the car, just as a reminder. And another interesting quirk in here, this car of course has paddle shifters mounted behind the steering wheel to upshift and downshift as you're driving along. Pretty common thing. And here they're aluminum, which is also common, but the outer edge has a leather component to it. So you don't have to feel the cold aluminum when you're shifting. Instead, you can touch the fine leather. That's a nice piece of attention to detail. And finally, our last interior item is the back seats. Believe it or not, this car does have back seats. It's a GT car, and that is a requirement. They must have them, and so it does. You can see two individual back seats here separated by a giant leather compartment that rises up from the middle. This is certainly no bench seat in the back. You'd have trouble switching between the seats. They are individual buckets because of this leather panel between them. Of course, as you can see, these seats are very tight in terms of legroom, headroom. You wouldn't want to be sitting back here for very long, but they do exist. Now, not much interesting going on in these back seats. The only notable item really is that the seat belts come out of the center, which is a little bit unorthodox compared to other cars where the seat belts usually come out of the pillars on the sides of the seats. Here they come from the middle. And next up we move on to the cargo area, the trunk, the boot, if you will. Open it up. This car is not a hatchback. It has a traditional trunk. You open it up and you can see it's not really all that big. In fact, it is quite small. Not a particularly large trunk. Even though it's a GT car for grand tours, you better pack light. There are, however, some cool things in the trunk. You have already noticed the umbrella, which is Aston Martin branded. I once owned an Aston Martin. It came with an umbrella, and I left it in an Uber in Washington, D.C. To that Uber driver, I hope you got all the money on eBay. Anyway, you also have back here an Aston Martin branded first aid kit, which is kind of cool, certainly cooler than a regular first aid kit. And next up we move up front and under the hood where you can see the engine. Like I mentioned before, a 6-liter V12 with a screaming 490 horsepower. From a quirks and features perspective, there's not too much interesting and unusual going on under here, although it's worth noting just how far back the engine is in the engine bay. It's not hanging out over the front wheels like you might think when you look at the car. It's pretty far back for better weight distribution and better performance. The other notable item with the engine, you do have a plaque under the hood letting you know who built the engine in this particular Aston Martin, which is always a nice little treat. Obviously, the other big benefit of a 6-liter naturally aspirated V12, it sounds pretty good. Take a listen. Some other interesting exterior items on this car beyond what I've already mentioned. For one thing, the clear taillights, just like the DBS, the flagship Aston GT car at the time, the Virage has these clear tails which look really cool. They always did, and they perfectly fit on a black car with white and silver accents, so you don't have ugly red or orange back there. I also always loved the turn signals in these cars, this row of LEDs. Aston was among the first to kind of experiment with cool lighting touches like this, and it still looks good more than 10 years later. As does this car in general. The Virage, the DB9, the DBS, didn't matter which one you got, they were all gorgeous cars. Truly beautiful designs that have stood up well to the test of time. Absolutely a fantastically attractive car, aging wonderfully over the years. Really a beautiful shape and beautifully executed.